Hello, everyone. My name is Tracy Garingo. I'm a practice manager for Mid-Atlantic Nephrology Associates. Also a great honor to be asked to present this webinar for PerfectServe, as I am a huge fan of theirs. Their service has truly revolutionized communications within our practice. Plus, every person I've ever encountered there has been so knowledgeable and helpful. I can't say enough about their customer service. So a little bit about our practice. Mid-Atlantic Nephrology Associates, or MANA as we call ourselves, is, I believe, the largest nephrology group in Maryland. We're spread out all over the greater Baltimore area. We're comprised of 53 providers, 38 of which are physicians and 15 are advanced practitioners. And those providers provide care in 12 local hospitals and over 52 dialysis units. We have 8 physical office locations and 2 accredited surgical centers. I personally manage 3 of those office locations where 23 of those providers practice. So obviously, MANA is a very complex practice. We have a lot of moving parts, and we demand an answering service and secure messaging service that can meet our diverse and ever-changing needs. So we switched to PerfectServe back in 2015 after experiencing a lot of serious issues with our previous service. At that time, excuse me, we had an after-hours answering service coupled with pagers, and anyone who has used pagers in the past knows how insufficient they were. The providers would only receive a number to call. There was no message, so they were basically flying blind, where they were calling a number back, not knowing who they were calling or why. There was no way to securely communicate with their colleagues. There was no secure way to share pictures or files amongst themselves. And also a huge thing for me was we had no control over our schedules at all. They were maintained by that service. So once we forwarded our monthly on-call schedules to them, we just had to trust that they actually updated those schedules and that they were accurate. Unfortunately, that was not always the case. Our on-call schedules change quite frequently, and even though we would update them of those changes, they would sometimes, and towards the end, frequently not update that in their system. And so we had wrong providers being contacted for, actually, I even had one who was laying on the beach and happened to have his pager beside him and received a consult for a hospital here back home, and he was out of state. So that's just one of the examples of the issues that we were having. We actually had a lot of issues at the time, but I'm actually not here to talk about those problems. I'm here to speak about the solution, and for us, that was PerfectServe. So our initial setup with PerfectServe, compared to what we have now, would be considered basic, although to a smaller practice, not so. But in the beginning, all of our providers and staff were given their own usernames and passwords. So we all had access to PerfectServe. We also have 90 front office staff, approximately 90. We also have a corporate office that I failed to mention earlier, where all of our billing and our CEO and our directors are housed. So we all were given access to PerfectServe immediately. So we were suddenly able to freely communicate amongst ourselves. So it immediately opened those lines of communication, which was amazing. We're also able to exchange pictures and files. If a medical assistant is in the office speaking with a provider who happens to be in the hospital that day, and the provider wants to see a patient's labs, right then, I mean, they can actually snap it on their phone and send it to the provider in the hospital, and they can see those lab results. It's secure and HIPAA compliant, so you don't have to worry about anything like that. So also, immediately we were able to send out group texts, which I actually use quite a bit. For instance, if our power goes out in an office, or our phones go down, or we are opening late or closing early due to weather, whatever the case may be, you're able to set up groups within your cell phone, the cell phone app, and just shoot out a text to immediately alert everyone of what's going on in your office. So we're always on the same page at all times. So that, I mean, the communication lines that opened for us was just tremendous and immediate. Also at that time in 2015, each office location was given their own toll-free PerfectServe number, and all the PerfectServe numbers are toll-free. But that number determines the routing of the calls that come in to those offices. Each hospital within a pod was given their own PerfectServe number. Each dialysis unit in the pod was given a PerfectServe number to call. And again, that is what helped us with the routing of those particular calls. Again, at that time, again, we're talking about 2015 now, select dialysis units were given their own direct web access accounts. And what that meant was it kind of cut out the middleman. So they didn't have to call the PerfectServe number. They didn't have to call the office. They could actually log on to their own web account and directly message those providers. And as time passed, we ended up adding more and more to those. So we added more dialysis units. We even set up accounts for the acute nurses in some of the hospitals. So again, they had easy access to our providers. We also, one of the problems, and we'll discuss that in a bit, with that, while it was an excellent situation for us that those dialysis units could directly reach our providers, we set it up where, for instance, all of the DaVita dialysis units shared usernames and passwords. So initially it wasn't such a big deal, but as we added more and more to the mix, we experienced some issues with that, and I'll touch on those in just a moment. Also at that time, on-call schedules were created for each of our hospitals. We also have after-hour schedules because our hospitals are grouped a bit differently after hours. So all of those were created at that time as well. All of our providers were given personal schedules for every dialysis unit they go to, and not just every dialysis unit, but every combination of care in those units. So for instance, one provider could cover every shift at a dialysis unit, but there may be 2 different nurse practitioners that assist on those shifts. So they received personal schedules for each combination of that care, because that is how we are able to pinpoint coverage if they happen to be off. Sometimes 2 people are off or 3. So that's how we're able to really pinpoint the coverage for those particular shifts. And one thing, again, I've mentioned this previously, but one thing that I loved about it immediately is that the managers were immediately given back control over their schedules. So I am responsible for programming all of my hospital schedules, all of my after hours, holiday weekend schedules, all of my dialysis unit schedules. I am accountable for all of those. So if they're wrong, that's my problem. That's my fault. And I can't blame anyone else, but it gives me the chance to check them. I can check them every day if I want, just to make sure that nothing was changed by mistake. And also to just update them quickly. I can actually do it from my phone. I can do it from anywhere. So it's just amazing that I don't have to wonder if those schedules have been updated, if something changes, because I do it myself. At that time also, we put fail safes in place, 2 of them actually, so that we didn't miss any calls and could continue to maintain our standard of care that we've come to be known for. So one of those things that every office has a default provider that calls are routed to if the prompts aren't answered correctly or at all. So for instance, if someone calls my Owings Mills office, say 6:30 in the evening, and they're in a hurry and they don't even listen to the prompts and they're just, tapping through to get to an agent, once they get to that agent, what you need to understand about PerfectServe is the routing is actually determined by the way those prompts are answered. So once you get to the agent, it really doesn't matter the details that you give that agent in the message, because the routing has already been determined. So because of that, we put fail safes in place. So if someone does that, doesn't answer the prompts or answers them incorrectly, those calls are routed to the default provider. So for instance, for the Owings Mills office, that default provider would be whoever is covering Sinai Hospital at that time. And every office with MANA has a default provider. Now, it's often not the correct provider because the caller didn't answer the prompts, but at least that call is not being missed. That provider can read it, either handle it themselves or forward it to the appropriate person, or even back to a manager for handling if it's not urgent. The second thing we put in place at that time was that all of the managers receive a backup notification in 45 minutes if a provider hasn't answered a notification or read a notification. So let's say it's 2:30 in the morning and provider had a rough day, they're on call, but they're sound asleep. A notification comes through, they don't hear it. Their backup notifications, they also don't hear, they're sound asleep. So at that 45-minute mark, all of the managers receive a notification. And the reason we set up so that all of us receive it is because I'm a sound sleeper too. What if I miss it? At least between all of us, someone is definitely going to hear it and take care of that call. So again, no calls were ever missed. was the ability to change our office greetings. So we set up office greetings for holidays or meetings or weather, whatever the case may be. They were set up in the original setup of our transition to PerfectServe. So we can actually go on and choose whatever greeting we want to use for those times, either for the full day or for a set amount of time. We can do that from our phones as well. So if I'm at home and we had a snowstorm overnight, I can go into PerfectServe and, you know, if our office is closed the next day, and just change it to weather, so that callers hear that the office is closed due to weather. And I love having that control. Not that I'm a control freak or anything, but I love that PerfectServe has given a lot of control back to me. So, and also with another note on that is with COVID, with being able to change those messages, we use that a lot. But another thing we put in place during COVID is that if our phones, any of the office phones, happen to be rolled during regular business hours of 8 to 5, we were able to put in place to give the callers an option to leave a voicemail, which we never had that in place prior to COVID, simply because we didn't need it, because our phones were always answered during those hours. But now offices were working different shifts or from home. So if a caller leaves a voicemail, those voicemails are directly routed to the manager of that particular office for immediate handling, which was a great thing and used quite a bit during COVID, and occasionally still used, actually. So overall, our transition to PerfectServe was so rewarding and smooth. Again, I just can't say enough things about them. I am a huge fan. We immediately experienced, again, the open lines of communication amongst ourselves, the secure HIPAA compliant messaging, the exchanging of documents and files, and of course, gaining control of our own schedules. Now that was in 2015. So here we are now in 2021. We've grown a lot over those 6 years. We've added providers, we've added numerous dialysis units, we've added another office, we've started rounding in another hospital. So our communication needs are even more advanced now than they were in 2015. Plus, we were experiencing some issues. So as I mentioned earlier, when we set up our dialysis units with their web access accounts, we gave them shared logins, so shared usernames and passwords. So all of the DaVita units, for instance, shared the same username and password. All of the FMC units shared the same username and password, which created a lot of issues as time passed, because if one of those accounts would lock themselves out or change the password, nobody else knew about it. And what's more, I couldn't even track to figure out who changed it to find out what they changed it to. So towards the end, that ended up creating a lot of issues for us. Another was inconsistencies in the user experience. While it didn't change the routing or cause a problem with the routing for us, it just wasn't a consistent, it wasn't consistent on the caller end or the web access end. So if a caller called into one office, they may be asked to answer certain prompts that they weren't asked to answer at another office, for instance. It just wasn't consistent. And also, because of those inconsistencies, it made tracking those calls, it was very convoluted. It was hard to decipher. So we had a lot of trouble with that as well. We knew it was time to change our setup, to revamp it, and to make some changes. And honestly, it was a casual conversation with our technical lead, Tyler King, who is also on this call, that prompted our most recent practice optimization. I mean, we were talking about some of the issues that we were experiencing, and Tyler just basically took those reins and ran with it and put all of this optimization in place that I'm going to allow him to tell you about. But it's just been tremendous, and it's brand new. We just did it. We just went live with it this month. So I'll just touch briefly on it before I hand over the reins to Tyler. But one of the main things that he put in place for us was that every dialysis unit, again, we have over 52 of them, received their very own PerfectServe number and their very own web access. So suddenly that meant if one was locked out, it didn't affect anyone else. If they changed their password, it didn't affect anyone else. If it also enabled us to delete accounts. For instance, if we stopped going to a certain dialysis unit, we could just delete that account out altogether, and it didn't affect anyone else. And it has really, truly pinpointed the tracking as well, which has been tremendous.